The Night Stalker of East Detroit. In East Detroit, there was an old apartment complex called the Ashford Arms. Once a place filled with life and laughter, it now stood dark and crumbling, its windows shattered, its hallways deserted. Locals claim the building was cursed, but not by ghosts, by something far darker, something that fed on fear. Anyone who dared to enter at night never came back, or if they did, they were never the same. It started with the stories. People on the street spoke in hushed tones about strange figures seen near the Ashford Arms at night, figures with sunken eyes, shambling footsteps, and faces twisted in agony. People began calling it the work of the Night Stalker, a creature of shadows who roamed the neighborhood, taking anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. On Halloween night, 3 friends, Marcus, Tasha, and Dre, decided to prove the legend was just that, a legend. They were locals, and they'd all grown up hearing stories about the Night Stalker, brushing it off as superstition. They knew the Ashford Arms was a dark, decaying place, but they weren't afraid. They were determined to walk through its halls, take some pictures, and show everyone there was nothing to fear. As they arrived, the wind picked up, howling through the broken windows of the Ashford Arms. The front door hung open, creaking on rusted hinges. Marcus, always the brave one, pushed through the doorway, and his friends followed. Inside, the air was thick and cold, carrying the scent of something foul, like rotting meat. They moved through the main hall, flashlights barely piercing the darkness. Graffiti lined the walls, faded and illegible, but something about it felt off, as if it were more than paint. It seemed to shift and squirm under the light, forming strange symbols that made their skin crawl. Dre tried to laugh it off, but his voice came out shaky. "Just an old building, right?" he said, but no one responded. They felt something watching them, breathing down their necks, unseen yet terrifyingly present. They climbed a set of stairs, each step creaking under their weight. The hallway above was narrow, lined with old, battered doors. They decided to start in the nearest apartment, room 306. When they stepped inside, they found the walls covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all black and white, each one more disturbing than the last. Some showed people's faces frozen in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Others were of dark, empty rooms, as if someone had been watching them, waiting. Tasha's stomach twisted as she noticed one photo pinned to the center of the wall. It was of 3 figures standing in the doorway, their faces obscured. She felt her blood run cold as she realized it was them. But how? "Who took this?" Marcus stammered, his voice barely breath. The door slammed shut behind them. Tasha screamed, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. A low, rattling sound came from the corner of the room. Someone was there. They couldn't see it clearly, just the outline, but they felt it. A figure hunched over, its limbs too long, too thin, its head tilted in an unnatural angle. Its breath came in heavy gasps, each one filling the air with the scent of decay. Slowly, it turned its head toward them, and they caught a glimpse of its eyes, black pits that seemed to pull them in, swallowing their screams. "Run!" Dre shouted, yanking the door open with a sudden burst of strength. They scrambled into the hall, but the entire building seemed to come alive, the walls vibrating, groaning, as if it were trying to keep them inside. They stumbled down the corridor, finding themselves at another door, room 309. They had no choice but to enter. Inside, they found the walls painted with messages scrawled in dark, sticky substance. Words like flesh, feed, and obey. But the most horrifying was a single sentence, scratched deep into the wall, as if with clawed fingers. "It waits in the dark. It feeds on fear." As they read, the door swung shut, trapping them once more. Then, the lights went out. The room plunged into pitch blackness, and the sound began. The sound of something dragging, scraping across the floor, inching closer. They tried to be silent, but their breaths were shallow, ragged, each gasp revealing their terror. Marcus felt a cold hand brush against his shoulder, and he bit back a scream. But when he turned, there was nothing there. Just darkness, closing in, pressing on him. Then he heard it, his name called in a rasping voice, a voice that sounded like it hadn't spoken in years. It was coming from right behind him. "Marcus. Marcus?" The voice stretched his name, drawing it out, each syllable drenched in malice. He turned, his flashlight flickering back to life, just in time to catch a glimpse of something horrifying. A face, twisted and rotting, its eyes glowing with a sick, hungry light. It lunged at him, and he fell backward, scrambling to get away. Tasha and Dre grabbed him, pulling him to his feet. They tore down the hallway, stumbling down the stairs, only to find the front door gone, replaced by a wall of darkness. They could barely see, but they felt something moving in that dark void, shifting, waiting. In desperation, Dre reached for his phone to call for help, but there was no signal, only static. He felt his heart pound faster as he heard voices, familiar voices, coming through the static, their own voices, trapped, screaming, pleading. Then they heard something worse, laughter low and guttural, filling the air with dread. Desperate? They ran back up the stairs, trying to find any way out. The halls twisted around them, stretching endlessly, each turn leading them back to the same place. The wretched figure was always there, waiting in the corner of their vision, just out of reach, yet close enough to feel its icy breath. Finally, they reached the rooftop, gasping for air, hoping for some escape. But as they looked out, they saw nothing but blackness stretching in all directions. Detroit was gone, swallowed by the darkness. They were alone in a world that had twisted into some horrifying nightmare. And then it appeared again, the figure rising from the shadows, its face clearer now, its mouth twisted into a gruesome grin. It held out its hand, long fingers curling, inviting them closer. "We've been waiting for you," it said, its voice a deep, inhuman growl. One by one, it called their names, each word sinking into them like a blade. One by one, they began to feel themselves slipping, their memories fading, as though they'd been there forever, as though they'd never leave. They felt the darkness creeping in, pulling them under, until there was nothing left but the building's endless wails, echoing through the ruins of the Ashford Arms, calling for new souls to enter. Days later, locals noticed that the windows of the Ashford Arms were no longer empty. Figures could be seen, trapped behind the glass, faces pressed against it, mouths open in silent screams, waiting, forever waiting. And on some nights, if you stood close enough, you'd hear the laughter, a deep, haunting sound reminding you that the Night Stalker of East Detroit was always watching.